Welcome back to Homelands. We are with poet Jake Skeets from the Navajo Nation, and he's going to be sharing from his two. He has two books, Horses and uh, Eyes Bottled Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers. I love those titles. They're so evocative. And he's been talking about them in the first half, and then he's going to be doing a little bit of reading. I just wanted to start out with some quotes about his writing from his website. Beauty is possible even when it appears impossible. An astounding book, and that is from the wonderful Joy Harjo. Another quote is, with its gorgeously wrought poems that both eulogize and praise, Horses is a singularly stunning collection. Skeets is a poet singing back to the often frightening world how lucky we are to overhear this awestruck music. And that's from the wonderful poet Ada Limon. And one more from Publishers Weekly. This alluring and exacting collection beautifully reflects on the boundaries between people and place. So yeah, welcome back, and we look forward to hearing from your collection, Jake. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'll read some poems from Horses and then we can have, some more conversation. Um, I am going to read a few poems from the second section of Horses. So, to give some context, the book itself begins with a 12-part poem, um, and the 12-part poem is titled Horses, right? So it's a title poem. The second section is titled Hotso, which is the Dene word for meadow or field or like an open field. Um, and that particular section is comprised of 12 different poems. So the book itself in total is comprised using numbers that are particularly important to Dene culture and Dene life. Numbers that I'm pretty sure other cultures share, like 4 and 6 and 12. So I wanted to start with these two sections, one 12-part poem and then one section of 12 poems. And I'll read from the second section, Hotso. This poem is called If Emergence. We look to the heavens from the north and Arctic of geese. What we are told of time, thunder belongs to a spring storm. But in the Swan Range, trumpets of cold wind carry with it a winter call. This is the story we tell when seasons change. But what we are told of time, time is an ulcer, a lie we tell through mouths not our own. Because this mouth belongs to policy, because time is stolen from us. Someone said the morning is our one sole government. And still skies cling to thorn, to utility pole, to my collarbone, to the promise of dawn. If desert. And then the weather turned, red-bellied and plastic like my arms, with the amble of a drone beetle. Night speak, hellhound, all done in and sour. A cold front spreads like mold, quick and in secret, and just before its lip, a veil of sandbush and horseflies make a run for it. Dust storms lope at the sprig and spur of low heels. My reach bent mumbling something silver, future speak, marsh croak. Even the moon is a bird of white shell. Then blue stone flying through the haze of another wildfire, the world ending all along. And this poem is called If Senses. Look, see the sun, scraped wallpaper, green wind, damp soap on a shower wall, see hushed sage, needlebush, and red brome. See silo, grain lost to echo. See bike chains, wheelbarrows, styrofoam melted in ash pits, a glass of cold beer, a gold doorknob in morning light. See scour, train tracks, tractor dust. See propane bottles, red top patches of rain, dyed wool. Touch the spooned crow swimming in the pond with sunfish, their spines touching the bottom of the sky at my feet, a mountain licked smooth by the monsoon above it, the memory there in the rifts on sand shored on its wing. Taste a splinter, a bullet, a dark hole, lick clean, igneous rock, water runoff, an oil spill, a gender, a wild rice, a book, tongue, copper mines, chemtrail, a squall line, a petal, an envelope, a growing storm, suck dry the air, a hurricane, the sea. Smell horses digging for water, horses sinking into trees, horses naming more horses, singing, field sinking into a name, field digging for trees, field naming water, singing. Morning, digging, morning, water, sinking, morning, naming all the trees, singing. Listen, the door, the winter oil, the lung, the deer, its leap, its croon, its thrush, its cold front and open porch, the clasp, the entryway, the collared sleep rock, the caress of another morning, its crash, its curtains dragging along a canyon wall, the splendor, the yucca string, the monument, the horses, their lilt, its halt, their sigh, its low hum, the trees, all one labored breath, the aquarium, the bottle of soda with peanuts, the hospital, its gray, overcast sky, the crying. Oh, yes, the crying. Then dream. A beautiful land, free, 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 free. Dream, time, unspooled from its barbed wire, its border wall, its pipeline, its blockade. Dream a thousand suns, even more their absence. Dream the darkness, how it carries the sound of us to the water. And this is the last poem I'll read from the book. If Field. In tender meadow light, stratum heart, now the ellipses yaw the wind's name. Under a symphony of heat waves, dome open, sunbeams shuck sound in glistening water. In the groove of its birds, hush in endless field. Day draped in the weeds like a painted morning, a liberation, a possibility, a hand held like another hand.
Wow. Beautiful. So evocative, like the images, the sensory details. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you've been listening to Jake Skeets reading from his, that was from Horses, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah. So tell us more, like what goes into you talked a little bit about your process, kind of what you built your collection around. Um, what about revision and editing and all of that kind of fun stuff and kind of what kind of time goes into a collection like this?
Hmm. I think, I mean, there's of course a tremendous amount of time, I think. With the first book, it took me maybe about 3 years or so to write. I finished a very early draft of the manuscript before I even stepped into graduate school. So I think that was the right move to make because I took a year off from undergrad to grad. And so I took that year off, again, just living my life and drafting poems and doing that first part of the process that I talked about earlier. Um, and I wanted to do it outside of the school. And so I was just out there working full time at a cell phone company and, in the commute to and from work, writing. And then it became, of course, the second stage in graduate school where I began sort of putting together these threads that were happening. And that's when I came across the portrait of my uncle, Richard Avedon. I had seen it when I was a child, but as a child, you don't understand significance of things. Um, but seeing it a second time when I was visiting the reservation again, um, and I began to sort of feel its impact and its power and um, the kind of uniqueness of that particular story. Um, and of course, my program was only 2 years, so I had 2 years to get it out the door. And it was actually quite fast in terms of editing and revision. I mean, um, and at least from my vantage point now, it seems pretty fast. I always say I wish I had spent a little bit more time working on Eyes Bottled Dark. Not that I'm, ungrateful for the, its reach and where it's been able to take me. Um, but I do feel that I wish I had spent a little bit more time because I feel I could have written an even better book. But because but it was picked up by the National Poetry Series, and they have a very fast timeline, so it's kind of like they move rather quickly. So with horses, again, I made another rule for myself that I would take my time. And so, the first book came out in 2019. I didn't again really start writing, sort of editing mode or revision mode until about 2022. But again, it moved fast again. It was about a year and I sold it in 2023. But again, this time I wanted to spend more time with editors, right? So I worked with editors from my publisher here in the US and of course my publisher in Canada. And I spent time working and editing and revising. And you're right, it's very fun. For me, revising is never agony. Um, I don't feel it as disruption or departure. I feel it more exploratory and discovery. And I do a lot of different things. Of course, it's in its earlier form, I feel more free, right? I can definitely, I take poems apart, right? I put poems together. I randomize words. It's very much a laboratory of language, like I was talking about earlier, where I'm just tinkering with things and moving things around and sort of smashing words together, making these phrases and taking away punctuation or putting in more punctuation, right? To really understand what's happening on the page with the words I'm choosing. And I feel like what that does is it creates a real intimacy with language. You develop a relationship with the words you're using. And for me, I feel like that's all about native or indigenous reciprocity, right? That if you're going to ask language to do something for you, you should do something for language, right? And what you can do is offer it a very beautiful articulation, a very beautiful expression, right? You can give it back what you know, dominant systems have taken away from it. The people in power, and they've been in power for quite some time, have sort of used the English language as a mechanism of domination and violence. And extraction and power. Um, but as poets and writers, we can offer beauty back, right? We can offer a tenderness and a kind of intimacy that I think we have lost with the words we decide to use every day. Um, and yeah, so my revision process is all about play. I have so much fun when it comes to revision. And so yeah, in my editing process, of course, when I have the book sold or the book is more finalized, the play is sort of constrained, but I do still feel like I'm beginning to now have questions about audience and the public and how do I orient a reader or really create a kind of choreography through the collection because I know some of my images, some of that playing might make language sometimes maybe inaccessible or readers might have confusion or feel a little intimidated by what's happening. But as long as I'm able to again orient the reader through something, right? I feel like I'm able to take them by the hand and sort of show them that this is language at what it could be, right? Language at a kind of beautiful form of language, if you will.
I love that exploration. You're right. Revision is fun. You know, so many people who aren't writers or aren't poets kind of think that people just like they sit down, they whip off a draft and it's done. They have no
Mm.
idea of the obsession that, you know, you have to put and pay attention and the time that you have to put in to revise and, you know, to get it to do what you want. But I love the way you talked about, you know, that you take the language of the colonizer and you kind of make it tender and beautiful. And it's like tenderizing meat or something. It's just like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's lovely. It's lovely. Yeah, we have about like 10 minutes or so left. What else would you like to explore? Would you like to talk about your teaching work or more about your manuscript or different things of your process that we haven't touched on? I love the image of you being a cell phone salesman and like on your commute, kind of working on your poetry. It's just such a great visual. But yeah. I mean, so just for people who think they don't have time, you've got time, you can find it. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with poetry, I feel like poetry is one of the more forgiving genres, actually. I feel like now that I have sort of stepped into the realm of fiction, because I do have a novel manuscript right now that I'm working with editors on, actually here in the US and in Canada, actually. So that's forthcoming now that I've have sort of written a novel and stepped into prose, poetry is way more forgiving, right? You can step away from a poem for months and then go right back into it, right? With a novel, you have to stay in the novel space as much as you can. You can't put it down because if you put it down, you almost have to start over again. Whereas a poem, or poetry will greet you where you are at, right? If you write something and you think it's not good, but then you sort of, shelve it away, 3 years from now when you pick it back up, it'll offer you something. It'll offer you new light and new orientation. So yeah, language through poetry, language is always forgiving. And I always try to tell my students that when we're inside workshop and I'm asking them to take these huge leaps with me to experiment and really push into language, um, they think of it as disrupting their story, right? Because we all have a story in our head. There's always a story we want to tell. Um, but we should be able to tell those stories with language, right? We should be able to develop an intimacy and relationship with the language we're using. Um, and yeah, and there, of course, the main fear I get all the time is failure or unsuccessful poems or poems that are quote unquote not good, right? Or poems that are unpoetic. And I'm always very curious about why they think any language could be unpoetic. The only language that is unpoetic is a language of power and control. And the students in my workshops are not fascists, right? They're not billionaires. They're not set on destruction. They're there for beauty. Therefore, they're incapable of writing words that are unpoetic, right? And so I really I'm really trying as an instructor and a facilitator and teacher and mentor to let them sort of take as big a risk as they can in their work, right? And knowing that wherever they land on the other side will be a poem, right? It might not look how you envisioned it in your head, right? But, that's the journey of poetry. Poetry is about discovering what's unknown, right? And I feel like there is the real difference between fiction and poetry. Not to say that fiction is not about discovery, right? But I think it's a different kind of discovery. In poetry, we get to more questions, and in fiction, we get to a really deep and intense narrative of characters and their lives, right? Um, yeah, it's the same process, the same train. You might end up in train stations that are parallel to each other, however. And yeah, no, I think for writers out there or anybody interested in poetry, just know that anything you decide to write down, as long as it's not causing violence or destruction, it is a poem, right? Because language is forgiving, and you should be able to really just lean into that, right? And have uh, a particular kind of ethics where you want to put in work and develop relationship and intimacy with language.
That's beautiful. A beautiful kind of treatise on like the difference between poetry and fiction and the importance of like not being your own worst critic, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to the creative process, just kind of letting it come out. Yeah, so we've got about like 5 more minutes here, but any kind of closing thoughts that you wanted to share about poetry, writing, just I don't know, more about your books or talk about your novel or anything else that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great time to talk about what's upcoming. Of course, Horses is going to be released here, or is in the process of being released, and I'm really excited to talk with people about the poetry collection, to talk about poetry, to talk about Diné poetry specifically. Um, but as I'm doing that, as I'm touring and talking about horses, because again, this book I finished in 2023. So I'm already in a different headspace. I'm already 2 years, was it 2 years, almost 3 years older, right? Um, and looking at the book now, I can already feel like a difference, right? I'm not that person who I was in 2023, which I think is, kind of a sign that I'm growing as a person, as a writer, as a poet, right? Um, so I'm really excited to talk about horses. But again, as I'm doing that, I'll be working on the redrafts for this novel, right? And what's interesting actually about the novel is that the novel itself and this book, the second book, were actually born at the same time. As I was in the midst of researching, moving through these archives and looking at newspaper articles from my tribal newspaper, which is called the Navajo Times. Um, as I came across the story of these horses, I also um, kind of set this arbitrary kind of date range of how many issues of the Navajo Times I would read. So I set it from January 1st, 1980 to December 31st, 1989. And I basically skimmed almost every single issue during that decade. Not full read. I mean, that would be a kind of intensity I don't have. But it became kind of just moving through quickly and highlighting and circling particular stories that really interested me. And what I found were stories of Diné folks beginning to move off the reservation for real this time, right? I'm pretty sure, of course, relocation, removal, those things are very real. But this was happening in a time where the world was changing, the 1980s. People were consciously choosing to pursue education or pursue dreams and careers. So I came across different articles about Navajo service members who were stationed overseas and writing home to, their family. I learned about ballet dancers and pianists and different types of musicians, right? I learned about writers and nurses, right? And like these people living lives, but they were living lives off the reservation. And one of the interesting things that happened as I was reading these newspapers from the 80s is that people were already talking about things like cultural loss and language loss, right? And there was a real anxiety there in the 1980s. And so I thought to myself, if there was already an anxiety in the 1980s, imagine what it is now, right? When even now more people are beginning to move off the reservation, right? And people, the idea of the American dream is that much more real, right? We're beginning to see Native folks in higher positions and even more powerful positions, right? And so the book then became an exploration of that. So it's kind of a multi-generational story that follows the decisions that these Diné folks make that take them off the reservation, but then back on, then off, right? Um, and yeah, so it follows, 1980s into the 1990s, into the early 2000s, into now, right? And it kind of traces through these characters a kind of arc of moving away from home and moving back to home, right? And yeah, I'm really interested to finish it and so that it can get on the shelves. So I can also talk about that as well.
It's exciting. I always love to see, multi-genres going. Do you have a working title for the novel yet, or still kind of
Yeah, we sold it under the title Dawn House. And for those familiar with, North American Native literature, right? It's direct. I'm definitely responding to N. Scott Momady's Housemaid of Dawn. Um, and yeah, so I'm really excited just to be in that lineage of Momade, and really have a conversation what that book is doing and what my book is doing as well.
amazing? I look forward to that as well. Well, that kind of wraps up our time here, but thank you so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Jake Skeets from the Navajo Nation talking about Diné poetry and his novel, and you can find out more at his website. And yeah, thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and thank you for your questions.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.